All right. Thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is tell the honest, just a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the mental health community, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here. My name is Iryna Khmelevska. I am currently a therapist at a couple different locations, actually. I split my time between the private practice, which the company is called Heart Theory, and then I also work at a rehabilitation center with people with substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health disorders. And a little bit about myself. I am originally from Ukraine. I moved to United States probably around, yeah, 20 years old, and took several gap years and then went back to get my bachelor's in psychology and master's in psychology, and then had an internship as a school counselor. And yeah, now I am here.
All right, so tell me a little bit about the work that you do in your private practice, because you said you work at your own company, but also at a rehabilitation center.
It's so the Heart Theory is not my own company. I work under
Mm-hmm.
supervision currently. So it's the company of Dr. Anna Cho. She's an amazing supervisor, a single mom, and an owner of that company, Heart Theory. So I worked for her. She was my supervisor in school, and then I began working at her company as a therapist. And usually at the private practice, I see teens, and I work with women most of the time. And then in the rehabilitation center, I work mainly with male population.
Hmm. What is it like working with those populations?
In the rehabilitation center, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's funny. When I was in grad school, I always was scared of working with children or people with substance use disorders because it's very niche and it requires a lot of specific skills. And then it so happens that I worked in both, or worked in school and then now working with this population. But honestly, it's great experience as a counselor. I think everybody should be exposed in their training to both of these populations. And honestly, there's also a lot of stigma around people with addictions, even among themselves, people who suffer from addictions. Sometimes people come to rehab and they're like, oh, I thought it would be just for, like homeless people, but we have a lot of different people who come and who suffer from addiction, from high executives to just, the regular people, farmers. It really depends, and addiction can, for anyone.
Mm-hmm. So what sorts of modalities do you use in your work as a therapist?
Hmm. So I was taught an integrative approach. Basically, I integrate several modalities, several theories. I'm mainly oriented in cognitive behavioral therapy, and then I have a art background. I finished art academy back in Ukraine, so art still informs my practice as a therapist a lot these days. And also, personally, I'm also a mindfulness facilitator and meditation facilitator. So mindfulness and somatic practices um, are also heavy in my practice, both in private practice and in rehabilitation center. In rehabilitation center specifically, when I lead groups, I try to create something that will, tap into all of these or one of these modalities at a time. I would combine like mindfulness meditation with somatic practice, or we would do some type of art based activity and then process it from a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective. So it's just a lot of blending of different modalities depending on the client's needs.
Mm-hmm. Which one's your favorite? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
Which one my favorite? Honestly, CBT is probably um yeah, I can't say one. I mean, yeah, probably CBT. It's, the most the theory that has the most backup evidence backup. And it just works really well for a lot of people. So if I were to pick one, it would be CBT, but I I strongly believe that you won't go it's like you can only go so far with talk therapy and CBT. That's why you need somatic therapy. That's why you need art therapy, because there's certain traumas and there's certain things that are just not accessible through the brain only.
Mm-hmm. And what have you learned in doing this kind of work in terms of like seeing your patients, having them talk about the struggles that they go through? What have you learned in working with them?
Do you want me to talk about the patients at the rehabilitation center?
Yeah, sure, go ahead, by all means.
Mhm. Yeah. Honestly, I learn every day from my clients, and I always say that, we are on a journey together to where they need to go, and they're the experts of themselves, and I'm just there to lead them to where they need to be. But that said, I learn a lot from them, and um, a lot of times people just need help, and they need resources, and they need to know that those resources are available. There's a lot of people who come in and they didn't know that, rehabilitation was covered by their insurance companies, and they thought that it was, for rich people or something like that. Okay. And once they come into a rehabilitation center, there's also a case manager that could assist them with like a leave from work, and if they have any kind of like legal problems. So it's I would say resources, it's something that's available for them. And um yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like in term, how do you as a therapist make sure that people who are struggling with addiction and all that stuff feel seen and heard? Because I think I don't correct me if I'm wrong, but um a lot of people with that suffer from addiction come from, broken homes, really sort of broken families, I guess. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Hmm. Yes. In in part you're right, and there could be trauma, there could be some broken families, but a lot of times you would also see people who come from perfect families, nothing wrong, there's no substance history in their families, and they just uh, turn to an effective coping mechanism, which is alcohol or drugs or pills or whatever it may be. And some people just tend to use substances or pills or whatever it is, right, to treat their symptoms rather than learning coping skills like breathing, meditation, exercise, etc. Right? So it's very it can differ, right? And when people come in to rehabilitation center, the first thing I always tell them is that I'm glad you're here. It takes a lot of courage to admit that you have a problem and actually take that step and put your whole life on pause and take that 30 days out of your life and come to treatment, right? That's the biggest step they could ever take. Admit that they have a problem.
Mm-hmm. But which brings me to my next question. How do we go about solving this issue? Because oftentimes, like you said, they not only come from broken homes, but also they come from perfect families. So how do we solve the addiction crisis, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Good question. It takes it takes work on both sides, right? Um, it's as much as I can offer tools, the clients have to. be able to receive them and to do their part. It's like you can, the saying, you can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. It's kind of the same thing. So we have tools, we start on motivational techniques, CBT again, help them identify their triggers, identify their motivation, why they want to quit drinking or using drugs, identify the future that they see, the values. And usually people who have a long-standing addiction, they would have a lot of losses. And usually those are relational losses like spouses or children or certain estrangement. And those become really big motivators for them to change eventually.
Mm-hmm. And like, is there, if I could change the subject, like, is there anything in terms of like that you want to learn in terms of something new as a mental health professional? Is there like a topic that really sparks your interest?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm brand new in the field. I just graduated last October, so this is my first like year in practicing. And so there's a lot of things that I want to learn. So far, I actually have a training in August for IFS, internal family system practice. That one is really popular right now. I mean, it's been popular for a while, but and I've studied it on my own, but I wanted a formal training. And then somatic therapy that I've also studied on my own. I want to get also more like a formal training. So probably those two is something that I'm going to focus on for the rest of this year.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, what sorts of tips, advice would you give to folks that want to dive into the mental health field that maybe want to study about like addiction and all substance use and like how they can sort of be more prepared to dive into that particular um population specifically?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of routes that one can take to work with this population, right? We have um, behavioral technicians who work at a lower level, but still can influence the same population. We have substance use counselors who specify specifically just on substance use disorders. And then there's therapists like myself that kind of like can choose to work with substance use or other fields. And so there's a lot of ways. And then you can also become a AA sponsor and influence people in that way without a formal education in mental health field. But if you wanted to actually become a therapist, get licensed, I would just say choose a program. It doesn't have to be an expensive program because essentially you learn in the field. I went to Alliant International University, and that was a great program. It was a mix of online and in-person training, and I really enjoyed it. And it was not necessarily the most pricey education, but I gained a lot, and time goes by really fast. And, if you really enjoy psychology and mental health and self-growth field, you will enjoy your education and time will just fly by. But it's not easy at the same time. You have to be able to sacrifice time, and there is an unpaid internship for a year that you have to do while doing your master's program before you graduate. So you gotta make sure you can set up your life and set up your support to be able to finish and reach those goals in this field.
Yeah, and get those licensure hours.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. All right.